These are notes number 9, your first notes for this week. We're going to learn factoring by grouping. Your essential question is, how do I factor higher degree polynomials with 4 terms? So your warm-up should already be done from class. If you need to copy this part, then pause and copy it. Otherwise, I am moving this up. And you can start copying down the steps. So I'm going to start explaining this. If you need to pause, then pause. So that way you can get what you need to. Oh. All right, so the way that you know that this is going to be factoring by grouping is you will see 4 terms. Whenever you see 4 terms, that means factor it by grouping. Okay. So factor 4 terms by grouping. So this is a different way of factoring. We're going to follow through these steps and do a couple examples, and then hopefully you'll have a good understanding of how to do it, and then you can do your Math Excel assignment. All right, so this is our example that I'll show you step by step how to do it. It's 8t to the third plus 14t squared plus 20t plus 35. So right away you can tell there's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. What we've been doing before is either 3 terms, like imagine that that one's not there. So 3 terms or maybe 2 terms, and it's a difference of squares. The other thing that's different is we do have a t to the third power. Not just the highest degree before was usually a t to the second. And I said usually, not always, but usually it's more of like t to the second. We call those quadratic. So anyways, we're going to follow these steps, and like everything, the first time you learn how to do something, that might be a little confusing, but the more you practice, you will get it, as long as you try. So the first thing, I forgot to put it in the step, but always, no matter what you're doing for factoring, always look for the greatest common factor. I have the 8t to the third, 14t to the second, 20t. So from the first 3, I'm noticing they're all even. So I could factor out a 2, but then that last number is a 35. So it's not even. I cannot factor out a 2. Besides that, there's no other common factors. There was almost a 2 from looking at the first 3, but then, like I said, there's not. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just start following the steps. Step 1, put parentheses around the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. So what that looks like is I put parentheses around the first 2 terms. And then when you do parentheses around the last 2, make sure you include that sign, because sometimes it's a minus and you might have to factor out a negative. So make sure you get that sign and then close it. So that's a pretty easy first step. You just have to put parentheses around the first 2 and the last 2. Then what you do is factor out the GCF, greatest common factor. What's left in the parentheses should match. So that should make sense in a moment. So when I look at the first 2 terms, I'm finding the greatest common factor. So right now, don't worry about the last 2, just these first 2. So 8 and 14, my greatest common factor is 2. 2 times 4 and 2 times 7. And then for my t's, remember the rule for that is you take the lowest number exponent, and I'm not looking at those ones. I'm only looking at these 2. So the lowest exponent would be a squared. Then I have something left inside parentheses. So like I said, it would be 4 left over from the 8. And for the exponents on the t's, I just subtract. So it was a 3 minus 2, so it's a 1. And I don't write the 1. It's an invisible 1. And then for 14, I divide by 2, so that, and plus, it would be a 7. And then for t squared, I factored out the t squared, so I don't write any t's or nothing like that. So I factored out 2t squared. What's left inside, I divided basically, and I subtracted the exponents. I'm left with 4t plus 7. I'm going to change colors just to show you the difference in the next one. So now I'm looking pretty much just only at those last 2 terms. Think again, what is the GCF? 20 and 35. The highest factor, the greatest common factor, is 5. 35 doesn't have a t, so I don't write any t. Now this next part's really important. I do want to put a plus. I'm not changing the signs or anything, so I don't put a minus, so it's usually just a plus, unless if you are purposely factoring out a negative. So plus 5, and that's it. And then parentheses, I'm factoring out the 5 now from those 2 terms. I'm factoring it out from there. So I'm basically just dividing. So 20 divided by 5 is 4, and it still has a t. And then plus 35 divided by 5 is 7. And then I can always check and just kind of think, if I multiply the 5, do I get 20t plus 35? Yes, I do. Over here, if I distribute 2t squared to just the 4t and the 7, because remember they're kind of separate, then I would get 8t to the third plus 14t squared. All right, so anyways, that came from there, and then the purple part came from there. All right, the last part of that step was saying that what's left in parentheses should match. It should be the same. Look at this, you guys. 4t plus 7, 4t plus 7. If they don't match, you either made a mistake or you can't factor it this way. So in order to move forward, these in the parentheses, it has to be the same binomial. Exactly the same. The sign has to be the same, the numbers, the exponents, whatever. Everything has to match. All right, so what we do to write our final answer, I didn't want to write it out in words because it would have been a lot and it would maybe be confusing. So just pay attention. This is how we write our final answer. The part in parentheses, the binomial, the 4t plus 7, it's the same, and I'm going to go ahead and write it one time. Okay, so that whatever's in the parentheses, that binomial part, you write it one time. And then for the other part in parentheses, you're going to get the parts that you factored out, 2t squared. And then here, that's why I always put a plus sign. It's going to be plus 5. And that's really it. That's how you do it. So you group together, put parentheses around the first 2 and the last 2 terms, factor out the greatest common factor. What's left inside parentheses should match. You write that part one time. You're basically factoring it out. You write it one time, and then in the other set of parentheses, you put the things that you factored out, the 2t squared plus 5. I do want to show you guys, you can check your answer by multiplying it out. Okay, so let me go ahead and multiply. I would just do FOIL or distribute. So just to check it, 4t times 2t squared is 8t to the third. 4t times 5 is plus 20t. 7 times 2t squared is 14t squared. 7 times 5 is plus 35. I get 4 terms, but I actually do not have like terms. What I want to make sure I do is write my answer in standard form. So I want to make sure I would switch these two. And I can just mentally check it. If I switch 14t squared and 20t, it does match with up here. 8t to the third, the 14t squared, the 20t, and the 35. So that is correct. So you can always check your answer by multiplying. All right, we are going to practice this one now and go through those steps again. I'll go a little bit quicker, and then there'll be one for you to try. All right, so write this down, practice. It is 2r to the third plus 12r squared minus 5r minus 30. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. That's how I know factor by grouping. As soon as you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, think grouping. The other thing I would just check for is there a greatest common factor? Either a number in front or an r to some power. The last term doesn't have an r, so I can't factor out a r. And between 2, 12, 5, and 30, all of them, there's no greatest common factor. So I can go ahead and start with grouping. So group the first 2, step 1, and then group the second 2. I'm very careful. I want to make sure I include that negative. That 5r is negative. And then I factor out the GCF, step 2. I'll keep the same colors. So out of 2r to the third and 12r squared, I can factor out 2 and then r to the second power. Try to fit that in there, 2r to the second. And then when I factor out, I'm left with just r and then plus 12 divided by 2 is 6 with no r. Okay, on my next 2, I want to go ahead and factor out a negative. Notice that they're both having a minus. So I'm going to make it a minus. And then 5 is the greatest common factor. You can't factor out any r's or anything like that. So if I am factoring out a negative, both of them become positive in the inside. I don't have to write a plus for the first one though. It's just going to be r. And now this one will be plus 30 divided by 5 is 6. Notice that the part in parentheses do match. That's the way for me. I always am checking it. I'm like, okay, if they match, then I know I did it right. And don't just copy it again. You want to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So always check and make sure that they do match. If I didn't factor out the negative, I would have had negative r minus 6, and then I'd be like, oh, they don't match. I need to factor out that negative. So that's really important. All right, we're at step 3 already. Write your final answer. The one that's the same, the binomial, r plus 6 and r plus 6. I'm going to go ahead and write that one time. And in the other parentheses, I write the part that I factored out. 2r squared, and then minus 5. And that should be my answer, but I want to check it by multiplying. Okay, so let me just check it real quick. I check by distributing. I'm actually just going to write it to the side because I don't want to cover that up. So r times 2r squared is 2r to the third. R times negative 5 is negative 5r. 6 times 2r squared is plus 12r squared. And then 6 times negative 5 is negative 30. I would just rearrange the terms to write it in descending order so that it's in standard form. And then I check it. Does that equal what I started with? 2r to the third, yes. 12r squared, yes. Minus 5r, yes. Minus 30. Yes, it does. Then I know I have it correct. Okay? So now you try. You try it, and we will meet back in class and see how you did. Right? Do the same thing. All right, so now you try number 1. 6h to the fourth plus 9h to the third plus 12h squared plus 18h. All right, make sure that you finish this problem and have your 3 questions on the left and a summary at the end before you take your picture and turn these into Google Classroom.